6 American states, 48 hours, and the threat of rolling blackouts that could shut down hospitals, data centers, and critical infrastructure across the Northeast. This is not a weather emergency. This is not a technical failure. This is the moment when the most integrated defense partnership in human history started to crack, and the fracture line runs straight through the power grid. Donald Trump just made what he thought was the ultimate threat. He told Canada that if they don't submit to his trade demands, he will withdraw the United States from NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command. He believed this would terrify Ottawa into immediate compliance. He thought Canada would panic at the idea of losing American military protection. But Mark Carney didn't panic. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he picked up the phone, called the provincial energy ministers, and within hours, a quiet directive went out. Review all cross-border electricity export contracts under national security criteria. And just like that, Washington realized it had miscalculated catastrophically. Because while Trump can threaten to leave NORAD, Carney controls the switches that keep American lights on. So, what exactly happened? Late last week, Trump appeared at a press event and made his move. He declared that unless Canada agrees to full compliance on his resource extraction demands, specifically the exclusive supply of critical minerals and energy to the United States, he will invoke Article 3 of the NORAD agreement and initiate American withdrawal. In Trump's mind, this was leverage. NORAD has protected North American airspace since 1958. It coordinates early warning systems, tracks missiles, manages continental defense. Trump assumed that without American satellites, jets, and infrastructure, Canada would be defenseless. He expected an immediate call from Ottawa, begging to negotiate. Instead, reports say the Canadian response was ice-cold silence. And then the counter-move. Mark Carney convened an emergency cabinet session. No dramatic press conference, no tweets, just a technical briefing to power utility executives in Quebec and Ontario. The message was simple. Prepare contingency plans for reducing electricity exports to the United States under national security protocols. And that sentence, buried in bureaucratic language, triggered alarm bells across Wall Street because traders understand what Trump apparently does not. Canada is not dependent on American defense. America is dependent on Canadian electricity. To understand why Washington is now in crisis mode, you need to see the receipts, the hard data, the structural dependencies that Trump either ignored or never knew existed. Receipt number 1, the power grid chokehold. The United States imports massive amounts of electricity from Canada, particularly from hydroelectric facilities in Quebec and Ontario. These provinces generate clean, reliable power from rivers and dams, and they export it south through high-voltage transmission lines that feed directly into the grids of New York, Vermont, Michigan, Minnesota, and parts of New England. We are talking about roughly 9 gigawatts of capacity during peak periods. To put that in perspective, that is enough to power approximately 8 million American homes simultaneously. This is not a luxury. This is baseline capacity. During peak demand, especially in winter and summer, states like New York rely on Canadian hydropower to avoid blackouts. The infrastructure is so integrated that some American cities essentially have Canadian electricity flowing through their walls right now. If Carney activates export restrictions, citing national security, which is entirely legal under Canadian law, then grid operators in 6 states will face immediate shortfalls. And you cannot replace hydroelectric baseload overnight. You cannot just flip a switch and generate hundreds of megawatts from coal or gas. The infrastructure does not exist. The capacity is not there. Trump thought he was threatening Canada's defense. Carney just reminded him that Canada controls America's lights. Receipt number 2, the NORAD myth. Trump's entire threat is built on a fundamental misunderstanding. He believes NORAD is a gift from America to Canada, a protective umbrella that Washington generously extends northward. In reality, NORAD is a mutual agreement. Canada provides territory, radar installations, airspace coordination, and intelligence sharing. The United States provides satellites and strategic bombers. But here is the critical detail. Canada does not need NORAD to survive. Canada is not under military threat from a neighboring aggressor. It has no land borders with hostile powers. The primary value of NORAD is for the United States, because Canadian territory offers early warning coverage for missiles coming over the Arctic. If Trump withdraws from NORAD, he does not punish Canada. He blinds his own defense system. Military analysts have been saying this for years. Losing Canadian radar coverage and northern airspace access would create a strategic gap that adversaries could exploit. So Trump's leverage is actually a suicide threat. And Carney knows it. Receipt number 3, critical defense minerals. While Trump talks about military strength, he is simultaneously threatening the country that supplies essential materials for American defense manufacturing. Canada is a top-tier global producer of nickel, cobalt, rare earth elements, and uranium. The United States military depends on these materials for everything from fighter jet components to nuclear submarines. If Canada decides to restrict exports under national security review, a process that Mark Carney has now publicly initiated, then American defense contractors will face immediate supply chain disruptions. And no, you cannot just source these materials from other countries on short notice. Rare earths require complex refining. Nickel needs specific processing facilities. These are not commodities you substitute like coffee brands. They are strategic inputs with long lead times and limited alternative suppliers. Trump wanted to pressure Canada on resources. Carney just showed him that Canada controls the resources Trump's own military needs to function. Receipt number 4, the market reaction. When Carney's energy review was announced, the response was immediate. Electricity futures spiked. Utility stocks in the Northeast dropped. Defense industry analysts began circulating memos warning of potential material shortages. Energy traders reported seeing price volatility not witnessed since the Texas grid crisis of 2021. And then the calls started. Governors from New York, Michigan, and Vermont reportedly contacted the White House, demanding clarity. These are not small states. These are key electoral battlegrounds. And their grid operators are now staring at contingency plans that include rolling blackouts, industrial shutdowns, and price surges that would hit consumers directly. Some internal estimates suggest that a 10% reduction in Canadian electricity imports could drive residential power costs up by as much as 18 to 25% in affected regions within the first quarter. This is not theoretical. This is operational risk, priced in real time, and Trump created it by threatening the one ally who has never, in modern history, posed a security threat to the United States. So why is this happening now? Because Trump operates on a single principle: dominance through threat. He believes that if you escalate hard enough, the other side folds. He used this tactic in real estate, in reality television, and now in foreign policy. But you cannot evict a sovereign nation. You cannot intimidate a country that controls infrastructure you depend on. And you especially cannot threaten a leader like Mark Carney, who spent years managing central banks through financial crises and understands leverage better than Trump ever will. Carney does not fight with volume. He fights with systems. While Trump makes threats on camera, Carney makes phone calls to energy ministers, trade partners in Europe and Asia, and financial regulators. He does not need to shout. He just needs to move the dials on export quotas, and the American economy feels it within days. Look at the contrast in leadership style. Trump, loud, reactive, making threats he cannot sustain. Carney, quiet, methodical, activating dependencies. Trump did not even know existed. Trump thought NORAD was his trump card. Carney showed him that electricity is the real power. And now Trump is trapped. If he backs down, he looks weak to his base. If he escalates, he triggers an energy crisis in swing states right before an election cycle. Either way, he loses. And the damage is spreading. Because this is not just about 6 states or one defense agreement. This is about trust. For decades, the United States was the anchor of the Western security system. When you had a problem, You called Washington. When rules needed writing, Washington wrote them. But if America's closest ally, a country that shares the longest undefended border in the world, is now actively preparing to cut energy supplies because it no longer trusts the White House, then what does that signal to the rest of the world? It signals that American reliability is broken. And now the real question, what does this mean for you? Why should you care if Canada and the United States are fighting over NORAD and power grids? Because the fallout does not stay in diplomatic conference rooms. It lands in your wallet. If Canadian hydropower gets restricted, electricity prices in the Northeast will spike. That means higher heating costs in winter, higher cooling costs in summer, and higher operating costs for every business that depends on stable energy. Those costs get passed down to consumers, to you. If defense supply chains get disrupted because Canada restricts critical minerals, then military contractors face delays. That means cost overruns. That means budget pressure. That means either higher taxes or cuts to other programs. Either way, citizens pay. And if this conflict continues, if trust between Washington and Ottawa keeps eroding, then long-term investment freezes. Companies do not build factories in unstable environments. They do not sign 20-year energy contracts when governments are threatening each other. Uncertainty kills growth. And Trump just injected maximum uncertainty into the most stable bilateral relationship in modern history. So where does this go? There are 3 realistic scenarios on the table right now. Scenario A, the quiet retreat. Market pressure builds, utility companies scream, governors threaten to campaign against Trump unless he backs down. He eventually lets the NORAD threat die quietly, claims some invisible victory, and moves on. The relationship stabilizes, but the trust damage is permanent. Scenario B, full escalation. Trump refuses to retreat. He doubles down, imposes tariffs, tries to freeze Canadian assets. Carney responds by actually cutting power exports under national security law. 6 states go into energy emergency. Rolling blackouts, industrial shutdowns, price explosions, economic chaos in the Midwest and Northeast. This scenario is catastrophic for both sides, but it hurts the United States more because Canada has alternative buyers for its energy. America does not have alternative suppliers for Canadian hydropower. Scenario C, the strategic realignment. Canada pivots so decisively toward Europe and Asia that the United States loses privileged access to critical resources. The Pentagon warns that without Canadian materials, national security is compromised. Washington is forced to publicly retreat. Maximum humiliation, global credibility shattered. Whichever scenario plays out, the uncertainty itself is dangerous. Markets hate unpredictability. Investors hate chaos. And Trump has turned the most predictable alliance in the world into a geopolitical minefield. Mark Carney did not need to threaten. He just needed to remind the world that power is not about who shouts loudest. Power is about who controls the infrastructure. Trump thought he held all the cards. Carney just showed him that Canada holds the grid. The lights are still on, for now. But the switch is in Ottawa, and Washington just realized it has no backup plan. So here is the question. Do you think Carney is protecting Canadian sovereignty, or is he provoking a crisis to expose Trump's vulnerabilities? Write your thoughts in the comments, and if you want this kind of analysis before mainstream headlines catch up, subscribe. Hit the bell, because this situation is moving faster than most people realize. This video provides context and commentary on publicly discussed political and economic developments. Despite careful research, some details may change or later prove incomplete. Please verify important points through reliable official sources and established news outlets. Stay alert.